Greg. How are you?
Hola, Macarena. How are you?
Oh, great. Your Spanish. I love it.
¿Cómo está?
¿Cómo está? Muy bien, Greg. I'm so happy that you can say some words in Spanish for our audience.
My regret is I can't speak more. I love Latin America and I wish I could speak more.
We know. You have been many times here. You have been our guest in Chile, in Mexico, and also in different countries. Yep. And for me, it's an honor to interview you, Greg, because you are the ICA co-founder, and for us, it's a great honor. So because of your extensive career, I will start reading your biography for the audience. And then we will start with the interview, if you agree.
Okay.
Perfect. Gregory Saville is an urban planner and criminologist who lives in Denver, Colorado. He runs a consulting firm called At the Nation. In 1978, he began his journey towards CPTED as an undergraduate student in geography and urban planning when he read books by Oscar Newman and Jane Jacobs. He became a police officer in 1980 in the Toronto region. In 1985, he was transferred to the Planning Bureau of the Peel Regional Police and became the first police officer in Canada with an urban planning degree to focus on CPTED. In 1988, he completed his master's degree in environmental criminology and urban planning. He published his first book on that topic called Crime Problems, Community Solutions. In 1996, he co-founded the International CPTED Association and became the first president of the ICA. In 1998, he was hired onto the criminology faculty at Florida State University, where he became friends with Professor Sarah Jeffrey and one of the founders of the CPTED. In 2007, he created a new CPTED planning method called Safe Growth. In 2015, he published the book Safe Growth, Building Neighborhoods of Safety and Liability. Last year, he collaborated with ICA Executive Director Mateja Mihinjak and co-published an article titled Third Generation CPTED. Today, he directs the International Safe Growth Network and he's coordinator of the ICA Course Accreditation Program. Wow, an extensive curriculum. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. It feels like my life passing in front of my eyes.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. But no, for us it's a honor because also you in your history appears that you had contacts with the founders of CPTED. So this is amazing, Greg. Can you tell us more about your, how did you start in CPTED?
Well, like you just read, in 1978, I was an undergraduate student and I read these books by Jane Jacobs, Life and Death, and by Oscar Newman. And I didn't think about it. I'm a young graduate student or a young undergraduate student. I was thinking about other things and I read the books, but it didn't really resonate. And then later, when I became a police officer, I studied urban planning and they found out, and after about 5 years, they transferred me to the planning section and I got these plans in front of me and I had to figure out what to do with them and I didn't know. There was no training. CPTED had only been introduced to Canada in 1975. The book had only been written in 72, so it was a brand new field and there was only one other person in Ontario and she was a planner in policing and she was doing it, so her and I kind of collaborated. And I decided to go back to school to do my master's degree. And that's when I read this book called Crime: A Spatial Perspective, which was by George Abai and Keith Harris, two geographers. And I loved the book. It was geography, which I studied. You know, I was originally in physical geography and climate studies and science, and I switched to urban. And I read this book and it made all these connections. So that really, really caught my eye. And then on a trip over to Wales, my family's from Wales, I met Professor David Herbert, who was a geographer over there, and he'd written a book on crime and geography. And so that really, from that point, I caught the bug. And I started studying and getting everything I could. And fortunately, my police department in my city wasn't very supportive back in 1985, 86. And I was kind of by myself. The crime prevention section had done some work on it. Some of the planners did a little bit, but it really wasn't supported. And so in 89, I traveled to Vancouver to do my doctoral studies, and I studied with Pat Branningham, who's a professor at criminology. And she had a course, Canada's first CPTED class, and with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I started co-teaching that class. And that kind of led us to create a company and do planning, and then I got recruited to go to Florida State. I met C. Ray Jeffrey, And so once a week we go out and have a dinner, a coffee and dinner, and I got to know his ideas and where CPTED came from, and the rest is history.
Now, you mentioned something that I want to ask you in further details, because you are also my master, Greg. We know each other for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
You have taught me so many good lessons about CPTED. But once you came here to Chile, we went out to dinner, and then we discussed about an attitude towards pioneer people. I remember that. And you say me that pioneers people, the most of the time, are like crusaders. That it's not easy to be a pioneer. So this is my question. How was your experience being pioneer in an area that you were the not very supportive area from other police officers at that moment to enter to the environmental knowledge? It was difficult to be a pioneer?
I didn't think of it at the time. I mean, there were other people doing work. I mean, of course, the first wave, Jane Jacobs and Newman, they'd already done work already. And there were some academics dabbling a bit, Ron Clark and so forth, in the Home Office in the UK. So there's some work had been done, but most of it was academic, some architectural work, but most of it was academic. And, there's not much connection between theory and practice. So the practitioners like me who were doing the work, there was not many. There was a course in University of Louisville called the National Crime Prevention Institute. It's been gone for years, but Tim Crow had run that class for a couple of years, and he was doing a bit of work. And of course, we had the course at Simon Fraser in British Columbia. It was a Canadian CPTED, which we thought of as very different. It's gone as well, but there was some stuff going on, so I wasn't alone. But it was, I mean, I would talk to planners and I would talk to other police, and they frankly didn't care. I mean, they thought it was crazy. I mean, the weird thing was when you're a cop, you go to calls for service and you deal with complaints from the public. And when you work for a couple of years, you go to the same places, you go to the same apartments, you go to the same, taverns and bars, and you go to these, but you don't go to those, and you wonder why they're not there. And so as a street cop, I kind of knew intuitively there was something going on geographically that contributed to crime causes in one location and not another. But I didn't know the concepts. And when I learned CPTED, then it made sense. But unfortunately, very few of the academics did any practical work, and very few of the practitioners did any theoretical work. So I was kind of in the middle. So it was hard. It was hard for a few years.
Yeah, imagine for the beginning, probably it was very hard, but probably because of that, you started the ICA. I want to ask you about the motivations. Why did you co-found the ICA?
Well, when we moved to Vancouver, I retired from the police and moved to Vancouver to do my doctoral studies. I needed to have fun, so I created a company, a consulting company in planning. And I had a colleague, Paul Wong, and he and I were doing this before anybody, at least in Canada. And we were noticing that when we did see people who knew it, they were usually people who had been trained in like a 3-day class in CPTED, and they were doing locks and lights. And it was very simplistic, and it wasn't what the original writings were about. I mean, when you read Jane Jacobs, it's very rich and open about neighborhood development, neighborhood cohesion, and people working together, and informal social controls, and all these really rich, beautiful concepts. By the time I got there, most of CPTED was just, doing access controls and natural surveillance. It was just so simplistic. And it seemed weird. So when we started this firm in Vancouver, we were getting a lot of calls from planners and developers and builders, and they wanted to know what to do, and they were legitimately interested. And so we thought, well, what we see from other CPTED practitioners was pretty simplistic. We need to kind of improve and professionalize the field. So we started casting around our reviews to see what was available, and there wasn't very much. And I found the fellow in Calgary who'd done a bit of work. His name was Barry Davidson. And Barry said, well, let's get together. And so Barry and Paul Wong and myself got together, and we decided to run a conference. And at the conference was 1996. And I brought everybody I knew to the conference, everybody Paul knew. And we had people from Florida. We had Stancia and Carter from Florida. We had my friend Paul Summeren come from the Netherlands, Tim Pascal from the UK, and Tom McKay from Ontario, who'd taken over my job in Ontario doing CPTED. And we got together as a group of about 70 people. And the conclusion of that conference was we need some way to move CPTED forward, to professionalize CPTED, to make it much more credible. And the solution was to create the ICA. And it's in 1996 in Calgary. That's when it started.
And one question, how was the first decade of the ICA? Because anytime you start something, it is hard. It's not so easy. How was the first decade?
It was exciting because there wasn't much going on at the time. I mean, there was no DOCA, design on crime didn't exist. They were just getting started. There was one book written, I think, by Clark on design against crime with Pat Mayhew. There was not very much going on. I ran a conference in 97. I was actually I ran a course in the late 80s on environmental criminology. And I brought in some of the players like the Branningham, Felsons, and Clarks and Keith Harris. And I brought them all together. We talked about what would the future look like. And, there was a lot of disagreement. The academics wanted to go one way, the practitioners wanted to go another. But one of the things that came out of that initial conference was we need some kind of an organization to move it forward. So by the 90s, I knew that we needed something to hold it together. And so the ICA first decade was hard, but it was important, and we knew that it needed to hold together. We needed an organization to do it because there wasn't any organization. And within about 3 or 4 years, we had a group forming in Ontario. We had a group forming in the UK. And then I met you for the first time at the early CPTED conferences in Mississauga.
Yeah.
And by the time we went to, here's the interesting thing, 4 years after we formed the ICA, I went back to Peel Region in Mississauga, where I was a police officer 10 years earlier, and I got to present the keynote presentation at the ICA conference to my police force, who 10 years later were finally doing CPTED, and they were doing what we were trying to do earlier. So at that point,
that's
it was
beautiful.
Exciting. It was great. It was great to see that kind of momentum. So it was slow, but we had those initial successes and the small wins tend to build up other wins. And, Gandhi said many, many years ago, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And in the early years, they were laughing at us and ignoring us. So I think today we've come a long way.
And how do you feel now? Because ICA is a global institution. How do you feel now?
Oh, great. Well, look, we've got this fantastic president who's doing an amazing job, a great executive director, Matea Mahinach, and we have a good executive board. Barry Davidson and myself are still around. Barry's on the board. I'm not on the board, but I'm still kind of contributing. And we have this international reach now. We have these organizations. Some are affiliated with the ICA and some are not. That's fine. And we have this international reach. We have hundreds of members in many, many countries. And, it's interesting because although it's global, CPTED is not the same in every place. And it looks somewhat different, right? Some cultures treat it a little differently. And I think as long as we stick to the core principles that, this is a democratic process, it's inclusive of everybody, it requires analysis and research to get the methods right. We stick to our principles. I think it's going well. But
when you started, you had that dream? When you co-founded?
Some of it we did. Yeah, we knew the professionalization was important. We wanted to get some kind of certification, which we have now. And we wanted the education. And education is now starting under you, I think, in a solid way. Certification has been well established and it's now professional. And so we knew some of those ideas. We weren't able to put it together because we didn't have the resources. Look, we're voluntary, that. How hard it is to get people to take time from their busy lives to do this kind of work. But I think the momentum is now there, and we hope it would happen this way.
Yeah, completely. And what can you say about the evolution of CPTED? Because you are telling a nice story about a timeline, an evolution of a practice, of a process, of an institution. What is happening with the CPTED first, second, and third generation?
When you asked this interview, you asked me that question, and I thought, I can't even remember. There's been so much work happening. It's been 42 years for my involvement. And I thought, I want to write it down, write a little phase 1, phase 2, and I created an era. And if you talk about just the 60s, just the 70s, just the 80s, it doesn't quite make sense because it didn't quite happen like that. It all fit together. But I did this little survey here, and I thought, how would I describe it? And I came up with 6 phases. And so phase 1 is the community era. The community era, which was the 60s when Jane Jacobs wrote from New York and Greenwich Village. We talked about village life, and Elizabeth Woods from Chicago had been at University of Chicago and did housing work, and Sloma Angel, the work he did in Berkeley. That was the community era of CPTED, the beginning before it was formed. Then the 70s was what I call the CPTED birth. And that was Oscar Newman and C. Ray Jeffrey and writing, here's these concepts, here's these strategies. the Westinghouse studies, and so forth. Then the 80s, and they established the principles, some of the early principles. And the 80s was when the geographers showed up, the environmental criminologists and the situational, the routine activities, all that stuff. But what happened in the 80s, it was kind of an academic era, was the social community participation side of CPTED started to fade, and the physical target hardening side of CPTED started to grow, and there was a split. And I think we went off track there in the 80s, my view of it anyway. The 90s, of course, that was the creation of the International CPTED Association. So we had an organization now. We had people like Tim Crow writing his book, starting his training. We had Oscar Newman rewrote CPTED in the 90s. And I think what we did in the late 90s was we created something called Second Generation CPTED. And it was released at the ICA conference in Orlando to bring the physical back to the social. And so we reintroduced that through the second generation concept. A lot of CPTED practitioners say they've been doing social all the time. Frankly, I don't see it. Some say they're doing it. They're doing a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's not cohesive, but it's not coherent. So second generation CPTED said there are specific strategies from the research. And that 1990s era helped us do that. And then in 2000 was what I call it the ICA era, because the ICA has really grown and dominated the market. It really has. And now the 2010s, of course, we have the green movement, we have environmentalism, we have now third generation CPTED. So it's been a really great journey.
Yeah, amazing journey. And I have been very honored to be part of your ship, of your journey.
Our ship.
Yeah, our ship. Yeah, completely. No, it's very nice when I hear you, Greg, because I have the context of my part of the history also. So thank you very much for that. And in that sense, do you think it's so relevant to promote and to teach people, to train people in CPTED?
Yeah, look, this has been part of the reason why I think it went off the rails in the 80s, and it started to talk about target hardening and physical building security and locks and lights and excluding people because, and right now in the United States, there's all this social unrest around Black Lives Matter and racial unrest, and many communities like in Vancouver, they're actually removing CPTED programs, CPTED guidelines away from the planning process because they feel that old style CPTED was exclusionary. It took one group of people and excluded them from the next, like a gated community. And they were right, it did. And it was wrong. And the reason why that was a mistake and why that was this mistake that was made over and over and over was because the training was too poor. The quality of training wasn't very good. And the training didn't capture this rich history, the story of neighborhoods, the story of community, how those are what really tackles crime, not just by, cacking at the branches, by putting a few lights or cameras in, but truly digging at the roots. And so training is necessary to teach people not only what the branches look like, but what the roots look like.
Completely. In that sense, the certification and accreditation programs are key in the expansion of CPTED. You are part of the committee. Can you explain a little about these programs?
Right. So the initial program, the personal certification, or the ICCP, we call it, started 15 years ago. There was about 20 of us got together, and over a period of a couple of years, we did research and put our thoughts together and asked the question: what are the competencies that a CPTED practitioner really needs? Because this is a practitioner certification. We came up with 11. And we kind of tested that out, and we started running the model. And Josh Brown was a board member and a tremendous pioneer in the ICA, who led the certification movement for many, many years. And then, the question came up: well, what if couldn't we have a course that the people could get to do their personal certification much quicker and streamline it by having them do a course ahead of time? So I kind of ran with a bunch of people in the ICA and elsewhere. We put together ideas and thoughts, and over a period of years, we came up with the course certification, the CAP, the course accreditation program. And that's been 3 years now. And we have 2 levels, the full course accreditation and the partial course, Class B. And it's great. We're streamlining it so it's much quicker. It's all done online now. So it makes it easier for professionals all over the world. And you, Mac, are our latest graduate from our CAP course, so congratulations.
Yeah, I'm so happy about that. Thank you for that. And it's so relevant, mainly for my region, because I am the first one, the pioneer, and also I have the responsibility to spread that, to teach more people. Another question, Greg, regarding with your comments, the ICA started almost 3 years ago a renewal process. it started a strategic plan process developed by the whole board members. What do you think about that? And what can you tell about that strategic plan to the audience?
Right. Well, so I'm not in the board. I'm outside the board. I kind of am an advisor. So I try to reduce my workload because I've got this other work going on. So I'm making comments and so forth. But I've been following with great interest the Umbrella Initiative, which I think is tremendous. And you know, we over the years in the ICA, we've tried to figure out how we bring in local groups, because you need regional groups and local groups because they have to have the local context and they know the local laws, and it's important that they reach out locally. But you also have the international global context, because really a lot of the innovative work happens here. The new theories develop internationally, and you learn so much by talking to people across the world. So the question in the early years of the ICA was, how do you put them together? We had chapters, we had affiliates, but we weren't, you know, it didn't work very smoothly. The umbrella structure is a really cohesive way to make it coherent, to give the ICA organization a structure that says you can come in at different levels, you can come in at different levels of engagement, you can be informal, you can be formal, and participate in this global community at the same time as being local. So I think the umbrella structure is a great idea. I think it's long overdue, and I congratulate those folks who are putting it together.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, yes, I like it very much. And the question that comes connected with the umbrella structure, have you a vision of the future of ICA?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, the future, I think the future of CPTED is the future of the ICA. I think they go hand in hand. And when I think about it, I always think back to the early years of Greece, how the Greeks set up democracy with their great pillars and the Parthenon, the Acropolis. And those pillars, I think, is what we have to keep in mind for the future. And I think with our future, the ICA and CPTED in general, there's three pillars holding up that monument. I think the number one pillar is we must be humble and keep learning. I think Matea said this during her talk. It's important that we keep CPTED growing. We keep learning about CPTED, that we don't just stick with defensible space, that's 40, 50 years ago. We need to move forward. So we have second generation CPTED. We now have third generation CPTED. We need to keep learning. That's the pillar number one. That's for the future. It's number two is we must take action. I know Robert Stevenson said in his talk about making it action-based. It has to, you know, theory is one thing, but I think I'm stronger with theory. I think theory and action fit together. But I think he's right. I think we need to make sure that ICA is a professional practitioner organization. We're doers. And so we face incredible threats right now from the environment, from social strife, and we must take stock of those. And the ICA has to play a role in making sure that whatever changes happen, we take action to make sure we're building those inclusive communities, that we're part of the story. We don't let it happen to us. We work with it. And then the third pillar is we've got to work together. And the only way you work together is if you organize. And remember, like the United Nations, the ICA is a family. And by coming together in certification and the website and a conference, that's the third pillar that's going to keep this future strong. So,
yeah, it's a nice vision of the future. I like it. Very nice.
Yeah, and you know, whenever we develop something like third generation CPTED, which we created last year, I mean, this is brand new. It's a new theory. We don't have an answer for it yet. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but this is where we're going to try these ideas out with our colleagues and see what they think and get feedback. That's how science moves forward, and that's how we have to move forward too.
Completely. And how does connect ICA with safe growth?
Okay, well, so from the very beginning, there was a planner in the early years who did one of the Hartford studies on CPTED in the 70s. His name is Richard Gardner. Richard was really a visionary at the time. And I met Richard years later, and he said to me, one of his greatest regrets with CPTED was it didn't have a planning system. It was a set of tactics and strategies, but it was left up to the world to figure out how do you put it in place? How do you implement it? Research on CPTED implementation is still growing, and we need more of it. So what safe growth basically says is we need to move from crime prevention to the idea of a safe neighborhood, because that's what Jacob's talked about. You talked about safe neighborhoods. So safe growth takes the CPTED strategies and it marries it with neighborhood planning, and it puts it into one process. And so safe growth really is a neighborhood planning process, and it's bottom up. So it's based on working with residents, working with shop owners, working with local police officers as a group, as a community, and giving the community some capacity, or what we call capacity building. The neighborhoods that are safe, when you look at them, are neighborhoods that are that have cohesion, that they work together, they have, you know, a balance in the neighborhood, all the things that second generation CPTED talks about. So Safe Growth works to build up these troubled neighborhoods so they can get to that point where they can start to do things for themselves. So it's a planning process, it's a planning theory, and we have a bunch of tactics that go along with it. So we're very excited about it.
And we can implement Safe Growth in any country of the world?
So far, we've been in New Zealand, Australia. We're doing it now in Sweden. We're starting in Sweden, Canada, United States, and we're now talking about Latin America. So I don't see why not.
Yeah, you're right. And also, if it is a very sustainable model, it goes hand with CPTED. They are como like family also, family methodologies.
Yeah, one is the fuel for the engine, which is CPTED. It gives you the ideas, and the other is the vehicle itself that takes you in a particular direction. And you need both of them together to make it make sense. Because for many years, CPTED was nothing more than, you know, a consultant coming along, writing a report with recommendations. And, you know, those recommendations may never come to pass. Or maybe a planning department puts some guidelines in place. You know, you have to have good lighting, you have to have good hedging. Well, what's good lighting? How do you know that unless you know the context? So it really didn't work that well. And so, you know, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. What Safe Growth is a coherent, consistent way, not just to do crime prevention, but to plan neighborhoods, to do neighborhood planning. It's neighborhood governance. So it's a whole nother way to approach city building.
It's very holistic, in a very holistic way.
That's the idea. It brings together disparate fields. Like that's what C.R. Jeffrey said back when he wrote his book. He wanted to be interdisciplinary, bring in the social, bring in the psychological, bring in the planning, bring in the, you know, all that was his vision, and that didn't get realized, but we're trying to, in Safegrowth, trying to revisit that. With third generation CPTED and Safegrowth, we're trying to go back to that and say, you know, we went off the tracks a little bit, I think, in the 80s. We need to go back to our basics, back to the roots of what we were supposed to be about. And so what we need to do is think about neighborhood safety, because look, streets are where crime happens. It doesn't happen in a fantasy place. It happens on the street, in the neighborhood. That's where we have to solve it.
Greg, and another question that I ask to all our guests: why do you recommend to become an active member of the ICA?
Well, because it's where some of the most leading advanced CPTED is being done. It's where some of the greatest practitioners around the world come to meet each other, to share stories. It's where you can learn, get the resources through the training workshops and the webinars, which you just started, and I see what you think is great, through the certifications. This is where you come to get that. And let's face it, every professional, whether it's a planner, architect, a doctor, whoever, they all need a place to call home. And this is it. This is home. So why not join the family?
I love the concept. Completely agree. ICA is like home for all CPTED practitioners. You're right.
It is.
Yeah. And as closing remarks, Greg, do you want to highlight one idea or some ideas for the audience?
Well, again, I come back to this one of the pillars of the future, which I think is the business about taking action. Right now, we're facing incredible challenges with the pandemic, with COVID, with social unrest in all countries, not just the United States, particularly in the United States, but all over the world. And we need a response. We need to be thinking forward. If you don't make history, history makes you. So I think a group like the ICA is a place where you can contribute to creating a new kind of future. And this is where you have to organize yourselves, and this is the way to do it. So my recommendation is you know, come on board, because we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. It's a good recommendation. And thank you so much, Greg, for your time, your energy, for being our Yoda, Global Yoda, the co-founder. And I want to say to the audience, if you like this interview, please give us a like and become an active member of our channel also. You can subscribe so we can share with you more information, relevant information about CPTED Talks. So bye-bye, Greg, and thank you so much.
My pleasure. Nice talking to you.